Good afternoon. Welcome. We're excited for this presentation today around our budget. We have three board members present right now, Director Salazar, Director Hinojos Pressy, and myself, Director Carson Cottingham. And so we don't have a quorum yet to convene an official board meeting. However, we can still go forward to have this meeting. It's just not an official board meeting until another person joins. I also want to note that we are joined by several of our budget committee members. We have Barbara Gio present, new budget committee member Oscar Porras, Patrick Schwab, and continuing budget committee member Lara Million. If I've missed anyone, I got to go to my next screen here. I think that's all of the budget committee members who've joined. So with that, I will keep an eye out for other directors and turn it over to Superintendent Perry.
All right, welcome everyone. It's great to see you, and especially to our new budget committee members. Thanks for joining us. It's a volunteer commitment. This is, I'm edging up to my 19th budget message in May, so I've done it a lot of different ways, but starting last year, we started doing these, what we call brown bag lunches. So our goal is 45 minutes, information to you. Today, we're going to acquaint you with the current budget book. We won't do any forecasting to what next year's budget is because that comes in May, but this is our way to kind of build up for that. And along the way too, I can forecast for you some of the things we're seeing out of the state legislature that will impact us financially. So the other thing that is, since this is my last season, my team is going to take these meetings. I'll be here every time. I'll help coordinate questions and things as well. If you have questions afterwards, Cassie is the one who will be taking questions for us, and then we'll try to come back each time to build in some of those answers. For the newest budget committee members, if you want an individual meeting with us, just with a budget book, we're happy to do that as well. So with that, I'm turning it over to our Chief Operations Officer, Bob Silva, and we will do a hard stop, even if we're not finished, right at 12:45. All right, great to see everyone.
Hello, board members, budget committee members. I'd like to take a quick moment to introduce you to some of the team that's here. Sarah Head, you could reveal yourself for a second. Say hi. Sarah Head is our Director of Budget and Finance. She's the one that helps put the budget together for us. We also have Ethan somewhere around here. I think it just went off. Assistant Superintendent Suzanne West, Director of Strategic Initiatives. She will be running the show next week when we meet for our session. And then finally, you heard Christy mention her, Cassie Armstrong. She's my assistant, and she'll be kind of coordinating the budget committee as a whole, as well as funneling all the questions through her for answers. Okay, let me share my screen here. Hopefully this works. Good to go. Is that a yes?
Yes, you're good, Bob.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. All right, so for some of you, this will be a refresher. For others, it may be some new information. But during this session, what we want to talk about is kind of the state school fund grant and how that plays into building a budget for Salem-Keizer. So the state school grant is a revenue formula, and it's an equalization formula that accounts for the local needs and resources as well as the state needs and resources, and then makes an allocation of the school fund based upon those. What it is not is a reimbursement grant. So we don't have to track receipts or anything like that. It's just based on the criteria as far as our student counts. It's money that we receive from the state for general operations of the school district. So each biennium, and we're currently in 25 biennium planning, the state school fund, sorry, slides changed from when I last looked at them. So the state legislature or the state funds the state school fund for the biennium. The way that equals out from a funding perspective is that during the first year of the biennium, we're funded at 49% of the allocation, and then 51% in the second year. And that's mainly to deal with just the roll-up costs, inflation that occurs over time. So that's why it's split out in a 49-51 ratio like that. The current state school fund estimate is sitting at $9.9 billion. That's both the co-chair's proposed budget as well as the governor's budget. So I believe Christy made the statement that this is the first time she's ever seen this happen. So we're kind of in, hate to say it, but unprecedented times in that. But it's important to note that the current service level is $10.3 billion. So you can see that we're still underfunded here. And if you remember from the last biennium, because we had the ESSER federal funding, they didn't meet current service level then either. So this is going to be our second biennium of less than current service level funding. And it's certainly possible that this budget will be approved before the legislature has finalized their revenue figures. So it's possible for that 9.9 to change, but we're going to use the current state school fund estimate. So this kind of represents what we've seen in our state school fund over the last couple bienniums. You can see that it was at a pretty steady and even growth rate from 2015 to 2021. And then in the last two bienniums, the curves kind of flattened out a little. So our state school fund is made up based on student weights within there. So each student counts as a 1.0 weight by default. So if we had 40,000 students, then that's 40,000 ADM that would be counted. But then those students that need additional supports receive additional weights. So as you can see in this table, those students that are receiving IEP services receive an additional 1.0 weight. Within that additional weight for IEP, there is a cap that's in place. Currently, that's 11%. And it's important to note that in Salem-Keizer, probably 15 to 16% of our students are identified as needing IEP services. So we don't receive the full weight. We do reach that cap where that additional weighting is limited. For our English language learner students, we receive a half weight for that 0.5. Pregnant and parenting is an additional 1.0 weight. And then poverty, foster, and neglected delinquent students each receive an additional 0.25 weighting. So when you see in the budget book ADM, that's referring to our average daily membership. You can look at it, consider that kind of our enrollment. When you see an ADMW, that's accounting for these weights. So while our enrollment may be 38,000-ish, our ADMW will be up in the high 40s, and you'll see that later in the presentation.
Hey, Bob.
Yes.
Could you repeat, sorry, I think it's a really important point back on the weighting, that the information around special education. I just want to make sure I understand. So there's an additional weight, but the law only allows up to 11% of our population to be weighted that way. And then we exceed by how many percentage points that 11 in our district?
So yes, but I think Chrissy probably knows that additional percentage better than I do.
Yeah, I think we're at 16 to 17% students identified with disability. And so we're only getting that 11%. There's been some move to help with that, but it doesn't get to the full second weight for the students. We also have a number of students, this might be too much information, but a number of students who are on are considered high cost disability students. So their needs are so complex, they exceed a certain amount of cost. And we do get to apply for reimbursement for some of our high cost disability, but that is only a pot of money as well. So it doesn't care for every enough for every student that's on that high cost disability. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and would that require like a change in law or policy at the state level, or how would it, how does that?
I think it's in the OARs, that 17% cap. And then the high cost disability is related to the amount of money in the high cost, but it's all funded at the state level.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to interrupt. I also did want to mention that we have another budget committee member who joined, Lisa Harnish, which I failed to mention at the beginning. And I'm still not seeing a quorum, so I think we can keep going unless I'm missing any board members. And I do see Oscar's hand up. Go ahead, Oscar.
Thank you, Ashley. To expand on Ashley's question, is that unique to Salem-Keizer, that difference? Because I mean, do we have like a higher percentage of students with disabilities in Salem-Keizer School District, or?
Oscar froze. I'm hoping it's, there you are. Okay, so I think I know your question is, do we have a higher percentage than other districts in the state, and are other districts in the state over the 11% cap? Is that, yeah. So I think both are true. There's lots of districts over the 11% cap. And I think that in our district, we have a higher percentage than a lot of other districts. Part of it is the complexity of students and services we provide as the capital city and the county seat is one piece of it. So, but both are true. And there are a lot of districts over that 11%. And there's a lot of districts with students' needs that are exceeding both from a cost and a capability. You know, there's just lots of complexities with some of our very complex students who we want to love and care for and give them everything they need.
All right, so this is a table of our enrollment history. What I want to point out here on these slides is back in the 1920 school year, you can see that we started actually declining in enrollment. And then obviously, as we went through the pandemic, enrollment declined both at the school district and the state level. And we're still seeing the effects of that decline. A lot of that, it's kind of dual reasoning here behind a decline. One is that it was already declining just from demographics in our region and birth rates. But then we're still seeing where a lot of the students from the pandemic have not returned to school or have left the state. So hopefully some positive news here is that in the state's projections, which probably have much more access to data than we do, they do demonstrate a projected reversal of the statewide decline in student enrollment in the next year or two. So hopefully that will help bring some of those students back to our numbers as well as across the state. And just as a reminder, across the state, we've lost around 36 to 40,000 students. So pretty significant amount across the state. What's good for Salem-Keizer is that we're seeing a smaller percentage of that loss than some of our neighbors. But we're still seeing declining enrollment. So here we're back to ADM and ADMW, as well as extended ADMW. So the extended ADMW is what we're funded from. The difference between the extended ADMW and the ADMW is that to help protect schools from significant year-to-year changes that may be outside of their control, the extended ADMW, which is what the state funding formula uses, is based on the higher of the current or previous school year. So as you can see, even though our ADMW projected for 23-24 is 48,621, the state will use our extended ADMW, which is our 22-23 school year ADMW, if that makes sense. So again, that offers, go ahead, Kristen.
Yeah, I was just gonna say the place to watch is that the next year is taking the previous 2 years. So over time, that extended does go down. It protects you, it smooths it out, but it doesn't fully protect you from declining enrollment and potentially a reduction in your state school fund amount.
Right. So an example of where this helped was with the fires down south a couple of years ago. They had significant drop in enrollment, so their extended ADMW helped them smooth out the impacts of that. Okay, any questions on enrollment and ADMW before we move forward, Laura?
Can you explain again how, you and I had talked about this, how you have a bucket of money and sometimes the declining enrollment actually might give you a larger slice of that pie because it gets potentially, if you have $9 million and Salem-Keizer has not taken a reduction in student enrollment compared to other districts, then you actually then potentially could have a larger slice of that pie. Am I making sense?
Yes, and I'm going to ask my colleague, Sarah, to give a quick explanation of the way that works.
Hello there. I think what you're referring to is that our per pupil funding has increased as the statewide number of pupils went down a bit. So if the whole state hadn't gone down, we would be in a much more severe position than we are. While it is a little precarious because we're waiting to see how it turns out and what happens with other districts, the fact that the whole state has gone down has increased the per pupil and made this not as I would have expected. Had you showed me this enrollment chart, I would have been very, very concerned, but it has softened it, and we'll have to see how that goes in the coming years.
Okay, so let's talk about the budget process. Salem-Keizer starts building their budget around December. So we spend several months in development of the budget until we get to this point where we start having these budget committee pre-information sessions. And we're kind of entering phase 2 of that process now, which is bringing the budget committee together. Our first budget committee meeting as a full budget committee will be May 2nd. So not that far away. And through that process, you will, and I think I may be getting ahead of myself, but And then that proceeds to phase 3, where the budget committee submits a budget to the board for adoption and the levying of the taxes. And then finally, the final phase is that we implement the adopted budget. And there may be times where we need to come back and do what's called a supplemental budget if we have a significant change in revenues or expenditures that occur after the adoption of the budget. So that's kind of the basic phasing of the budget process. So the main function of the budget committee is to review, discuss, make additions or deletions, and then finally submit an approved budget to the board. And that's a process that the budget officer owns. And in Salem-Keizer, Superintendent Perry is designated as the budget officer. And me as the COO is designated as the deputy budget officer. So once you finish your deliberations, you'll approve the budget, which then forwards it to the district board for adoption. You also define the maximum tax rate for the property tax levy. And then once you approve it, the board adopts the budget. So we repeat that several times because it's important, and I still get them wrong from time to time. So budget committee approves, board adopts. So at the first budget committee meeting, which once again is on May 2nd, this year. One of the first things you'll do is elect officers to run the budget committee. You will receive the superintendent's budget message, and you'll review your rules and order of operation. Out on our website, under the board section, you'll find BG 12, which defines the role of the budget committee. It's important to note that the budget committee process is not defined by Salem-Keizer, it's defined by state budget law. So a lot of this is defined by statute. During the first meeting, public comment will not be heard. That will be the next one, which is on May 16th, will be the first budget committee meeting where public comment is heard. This gives everybody kind of an opportunity to hear the budget message. At that point, they'll have access to the budget documents and be able to review and formulate any questions or comments that they have. So what is the superintendent's budget message? Simply, the message explains the budget. It gives the budget committee and the public information that will help them understand it. Again, by law, it must contain a brief description of the financial policies reflected in the budget and explain the important features of the budget. Within our budget documents are, in addition to what's required, some important things in there are the assumptions that go into the development of the budget. And we'll look at that here in a second of our current budget document, so you can see what that looks like. And it must also explain significant changes from prior year's budget in revenues and appropriations, or explain any changes in financial policies. So the budget committee will receive a copy of the proposed budget at the same time the superintendent gives their budget message to the public. And I believe it's at the beginning or after your presentation. I can't remember, sorry. But either before or after Christy gives her budget message, you'll receive your, if we're in person, an actual book of the budget book, and the public will be able to also simultaneously access it online from our website at that time. If for any reason we're not meeting in person this year, we'll figure out how to get both the electronic version to you at the same time that the superintendent presents her budget committee message.
Bob, Oscar has a question in the chat. Oscar, do you want to ask it for the report or for the public?
Yeah, Bob, on the previous slide, it mentioned significant changes, to explain significant changes. Is that defined somewhere, or how is significant, if we're making changes, how do we know what's significant and what isn't?
Good question. That exceeds my knowledge. So I'm going to phone a friend.
So we don't have an official definition, but the way I have navigated that in my budget message is I'm trying to tell the story of what's happening in the district, but also what might be changing. So last year, an example is because of declining enrollment at the elementary school, we chose that some of the classroom FTE at the elementary school was going to be converted to a full-time behavior specialist in every elementary school. So that to me was a significant change because it was a little bit of only a change in the budget, but also a change in practice and what people could see. So I used both of those as kind of my filters for that. And then another example is if we're seeing a trend in inflation that's significant, that will be something I point out. Or if we're in the middle of collective bargaining agreement, things like that. So I try to look at what might be a change to program, also a financial factor, and to try to highlight those.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And the importance of the budget message is throughout the rest of the budget book, it's a bunch of numbers, some of them very big. What the budget message does is translate those numbers into positive impacts on kids. So that's really what the budget message is helping explain is you see all these numbers, here's the impact on kids. All right, so out on the website, and I'm going to try to double duty. Christy, could you maybe post a link to this page out on the website so people in the meeting can follow along as we start to look at the current year, so 22-23, not the upcoming year that the budget committee will review, but we're look at the current year budget and kind of orient you to some of the key sections within the budget document. Oops. All right, and some of you may have a physical document version of the budget book. Others may be using digitally. When we reference page numbers, we're referencing the number at the bottom of the page within the PDF, not the PDF page number. So it's important to call out that distinction there. So as the budget book begins, you'll see that the page number is at the bottom of each page. That's the page number that we're going to be referencing. So in addition to the presentation that the superintendent presents for the budget message, you can find the written version of it on page 6 of the budget book, where it goes over enrollment, whatever investments are being made, as well as just telling the story of the changes and what this budget represents for the year. Sorry, I should have checked. Does everybody have the budget book downloaded? 22-23 budget, so we're all on the same page here. Next up on page 25, you heard me talk about the assumptions before. That helps you kind of determine kind kind of the foundational aspects of how the budget was built. So it'll tell you what state school fund revenue projection that we're using. In the case of this biennium, it was 9.3 billion. It'll tell you the extended AD&W that we're budgeting at, the tax revenue projections. It'll remind you of our beginning fund balance, which plays into the amount of revenue that's available during that school year. Any staff-related costs that can result from our collective bargaining agreements with our association. So it's important to note this year we are in negotiations with both of our associations. So you'll see last year we had salary and medical calculations based on the CBA. Any COLA increases would typically be represented here as well. Our PERS costs and how we calculate that. Materials and services growth, so basically inflationary costs are identified here. And then in this particular case, it was the Oregon Paid Family Medical Leave Act was implemented. If we continue down the book to page 50. This is kind of where our resources and requirements start. So this starts defining all of our revenue sources as well as our expenditures. And again, it's a lot of numbers. As you look across, state law does require our budget book to identify the previous 2 years. I believe I have that accurate. So you'll see the 1920 actual, 2021 actual, 21-22 budgeted amount, and then 22-23 proposed, approved, and adopted. So you can get some sense of the historical data as you look across, but pretty much the numbers you're going to want to be using are, as you get into our budget book, will be the proposed column to see what the proposed budget is in these particular line items. And again, if you keep scrolling down, you'll come out of the resources section, which is revenue, into the requirements section, which are expenses. And then finally, on page 101, begins a section around FTE. So what this does is take from all of those requirements section where you see changes in funding, any of that has to do with FTE is represented and aggregated in this section. So you can kind of see what changes to FTE, which are the people working in the school district. And you can see we break it out around what the previous year budget was, and then what the proposed budget is and whether it's a plus or minus. So you'll want to review that as part of the budget book. It also has an explanation of why the change. Just because you see a minus sign doesn't necessarily mean that that's a staff member that was cut or let go. It could be that we just made a technical adjustment or changed the fund that they were associated with. Chris, anything else you want to add to this?
No.
No. All right. And that leaves us 10 minutes for questions. So as we wrap up, our next pre-budget information session will be next Wednesday, April 12th, also during the lunch session. And again, that'll be via Zoom. If you have questions between now and then, please feel free to forward those questions to Cassie. And then as in future sessions, we'll try to answer as many of those as possible. Depending on the depth of research that it takes to answer those questions, it may take a little bit longer than 1 week, but we'll do our best to stay and get that information. All right. So I will stop sharing and open up the floor for any questions. We have 9 minutes available.
I have a question. I don't know how to raise my hand. How do I raise my hand?
I think Laura had her hand up first, and then we'll come to you, Barbara, okay?
Okay, thanks, Ashley. I just wanted, Bob, can you explain, as you did to me, about how the district allocates funds to the individual principals at the school, who then are responsible for then allocating that out or using those funds for kind of the maintenance and of their school itself, for things such as replacing teachers' desks, stuff of that nature?
Sure. So each, well, pretty much you said it. So each school is allocated a funding amount based on the number of students that are available or not available, enrolled in their school. And then some of that is in staff. A lot of it's in just resources, what we call stuff and things. And the principal does have discretion on how to use those funds for their building.
And then how does the district determine how much money goes to each at the school level? It's assigned.
Yeah, so we do it based on a kind of a formula based on the pot of money. And one of the things that I think is super hard in a large district budget is you don't, you see the big numbers, you don't see it all the way out to a school, which is why the questions, and they're good ones. So we have a per pupil amount that we allocate out to schools based on the pot of money that's there. And then it's higher at high school than it is at middle and elementary because just there's additional costs in running a comprehensive high school. And then we also have a central stores that people can buy from, trying to keep the costs down for our schools. And then at a district level, we do have a couple places where we have funds that we help. So last year when the board adopted that equity-based asset replacement fund, that was a place to really work on some of those larger assets like playgrounds and things over time. So it's not that they're responsible for everything, but they are responsible for the bulk of things like books and chairs and things like that. And then we try to influx whenever there is some additional money to help, because it's never quite enough.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Barbara.
Thanks. I have a request and a question. I'll start with my request. I have difficulty accepting the invites for these meetings and having my calendar guard the site to the link for the Zoom. And asking the folks who send the board agenda to include those links, or at least send it to me, because I can't do it and I don't want to miss meetings. So if we get the agenda, I'm not sure why we can't get the agenda and the link re-added to that agenda. That would be great. Otherwise, I'm going to be sending an email every single time we get a reminder, please send me the link. Yeah. And then the question I also have is, I know last year we had some security folks talk to us about how the money gets allocated or for improvements in the schools when it comes to adding the best, I think it's called the vestibule or something like that, or darkening the windows. I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about that, or have another meeting and see how much money is going to be allocated to each school to review that each school is as safe as possible. I know we don't have resource officers anymore, which is fine. I'm just trying to figure out a way to keep the school kids safe and make sure that teachers feel safe, and that we're doing everything possible to make sure that we are accommodating those scenarios.
We'll we'll weave into one of the presentations just where we are with the bond projects, because the bulk of those secure vestibules and things were done through the bond projects. And I believe we've done some other work around keying and stuff. So we'll get kind of a brief update about that. And we'll do our best on the link too, Barbara.
I feel really bad. Your staff's doing really good, but I just can't,
Okay.
nothing pops up in my end when I accept. It just says meetings today, but I don't have a link. And so then I got to go back, 3 or 4 months when you guys send them. I'm like, did I erase that one? So it's kind of a mess. Sorry. Thank you.
Don't worry. I've had a mess with my calendar today too.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
You've probably said this before, Bob or Christy. Will you go over all the district budgeted fund types like next week or one of the future ones to really break down like where are local property taxes and how much percent of the total that pays for versus the state school fund versus?
Yeah, we'll go over the ESSER integrated application, all of that, but we'll add for next time a little piece on kind of where the funds come from, and we'll show that state school fund estimate to show you what that looks like.
Thank you. That'd be really helpful.
Yep.
And then the terrifying loss of the ESSER funds and what
I think, yeah, that's really important to pay attention to 1 year out.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Laura, did you have another question? Go ahead if you do.
Sorry. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I did have another question. On some of the next sessions, can you guys dive into Avid and what that is and kind of give us an explanation as to, I guess, what it does and why it's being expanded and what the children are getting in return for that. And then also, I'd like to see some conversation on expected, I guess, any kind of attrition for staffing, what's being done to keep staffing, or I guess encourage people to even hire on with the school district, keep them, our teachers especially. I know you guys are in the middle of the negotiations for the union, but what are we doing to keep staff from leaving? And what is the expectation of if staff will actually, we're going to expect more attrition, more people leaving, or we're going to bring more people on board? We're going to have a lot of gaps. And that was it.
Great, thank you.
Good.
So I wanted to mention one more thing. Oscar, I wanted to go back to your question about what is significant. If you look at now that we've gone through the budget document and go back to that budget message, that kind of gives you the lay of the land of what last year I thought was significant in the time. Also, if anyone wants a hard copy of a budget book, let us know. We'll get one sent to you or delivered to you as well. Just let Cassie know.
And for clarification, that would be a hard copy of the current 22-23.
Yeah, the current budget book. Just if you like a hard copy, and then we'll ask the same question before the budget message because there are a couple people that likely will only be online. And so we'll make sure that we've got you a hard copy for that night as well, if you want one. If not, we'll have it posted on the website.
Right. If we don't have any more questions and we're right at 45 minutes, hard stop, I'll pass it back to you, Ashley.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone for coming. Thanks for putting these together, Superintendent Perry and Director Silva. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Next week. Bye.
For more videos and information, go to capitalcommunitymedia.org. and follow us on social media.